Hey, it's Pastor Scott. This is the Pastor Scott Show. Go to pastorscottshow.com, pastorscottshow.com to connect with us online. The phone number is 888-528-2557. Ladies and gentlemen, I am off today, but sitting in my chair is Pastor Shane Idleman. Welcome, Pastor Shane Idleman, to the Pastor Scott Show.
Shane Idleman, a privilege to be here filling in for Pastor Scott on the Pastor Scott Show. I want to encourage you, I know I say this a lot, but go to Rumble. Find Pastor Scott Show on Rumble, and you can watch all of these episodes, segments, whatever you want to call them, such important topics. And this one is going to be so helpful, maybe not today if you're going to eat a lot tomorrow on Thanksgiving, but you're going to want to go back to this for sure before New Year's resolutions. And the topic, we're going to look at this from a biblical perspective, okay? Health and fitness from a biblical perspective. So in light of Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, New Year's resolutions coming up, I would actually encourage you, I just posted this on my Facebook and Instagram, I believe today, is the New Year, Christmas, Thanksgiving, all that can be times actually where you begin to work on your health and fitness. You don't have to just give up and gain 5 or 6 pounds and get unhealthy and feel bad and then have to hit it hard January 1st. You can actually start to make a lot of changes now. So what in the world does this have to do with the Bible, Shane? Well, trust me, a lack of discipline in this area leads to a lack of discipline in other areas. Not only that, I believe that God has given us our health that we must steward. We must use wisdom, this incredible gift that He has given us. We only have it one time, and stewarding it, using wisdom, taking care of it, fueling it correctly, having the energy, the sleep. It's and versus just caving in and giving up, and that's why we're seeing such an epidemic of disease, especially in America. Also, health plays an enormous and significant role in productivity, energy, and attitude, and it deeply affects our emotional health. So think about that for a minute. Why wouldn't this be important? It helps productivity. So as a pastor, as a mom, a dad, an employee, an employer, you're a parent possibly, how much more important is productivity when we're trying to fulfill this calling that God has put on our life? What about energy and attitude, having a better attitude, and emotional health? You know, I talked about this, I believe, yesterday, that serotonin is created in the gut microbiome, and eating good God-given food. So I'm going to talk about that as we go. I would encourage you, again, go to Rumble. Make sure you watch this whole episode, because I know sometimes driving on the freeway in traffic can get a little stressful, and you've got places to be, and you might not catch all of this, and that's the best way to catch it. But of course, you can follow me too on Instagram, YouTube, and all the different social media platforms. So number 3 on the reason why this is so important, especially for Christians, because fitness is not being discussed, and it's not really about physical fitness and, you know, looking great at the beach. It has nothing to do with that. Physical fitness and spiritual fitness often run parallel. When I'm taking care of my body and I'm disciplining my body and I'm eating in moderation, I'm fasting, the spiritual benefits are huge. They go together. So this topic is not being discussed in the churches very much. And you might say, what is a pastor doing talking about this topic? Well, let me give you a little bit of background quickly. Before I became a pastor, I actually worked with the fastest growing fitness company in the world in the 1990s. I was a district manager for 24 Hour Fitness. That's right. It was Family Fitness Centers. Then they got bought out by 24 Hour Nautilus and became 24 Hour Fitness under, I believe the CEO's name was Mark Mastroff. And I was a district manager there, so I supervised thousands of fitness plans, worked with countless trainers. I had lots of employees underneath me. And so I found out what works, what doesn't, and why. I've actually written books on this. You can actually download them for free right now at westsidechristianfellowship.org. Again, westsidechristianfellowship.org. All these resources are free. Fasting, fitness, dieting. What does the Bible say is the best diet? And I'm going to get to that, so hold on. So what I've learned, though, is even now as being a pastor, congregations, plus I've had my own battles with, borderline type 2 diabetes, heart disease running in my family, all the different things, weight loss, weight gain, struggling to really lose that weight, keep it off. So I'm gonna hopefully cover all of that. We've got some incredible guests coming on as well, too, that you're going to want to hear from. But congregations, our congregations, their children, and often the pastor are all sicker than previous generations, and very few people are helping them. We're the sickest generation. I believe that it said that this could be the first generation that doesn't outlive their parents. So we've got to make some drastic changes. And I think the church, we teach on finances, we teach on healthy marriage, we teach on healthy parenting. Why not teach on healing our bodies and focusing on health, because it affects everything? Guys, it's not just about looks at all. It actually is about productivity and being better stewards of this gift that God has given us. I know I said that earlier, but it's so important because I think, over the years, I've had a lot of verses thrown at me that are completely out of context. I've had, even when I started, let me just open up about this for a minute. For the first 10 years of the church planting, I didn't talk about this too much because I would start to, and people say, "Oh, Pastor, don't you know that physical exercise profits little? It's it's spiritual exercise that matters." And, as they consume their third In-N-Out burger, right? It's like, I just kind of got frustrated and, okay, maybe this isn't that important. But the more I began to pray with people, and people would come in and I'm dealing with anxiety and I don't know what to do. I'm not sleeping well. And I would get them off of caffeine. And in a month, they're feeling great. Or I would change their diet and get the microbiome healthy, get the gut bacteria well, and get the weight coming off, and their type 2 diabetes would vanish. And so I saw, we pray for healing, but how much of it is self-inflicted, the self-inflicted wounds? And so I believe that we can heal our body. Yes, God heals, I believe, but if we're sick because of the choices we're making, it might be time to make different choices. And again, the physical affects the spiritual. The physical, how we take care of our body, affects the spiritual. If you don't believe me, try getting just a few hours of sleep for a few nights, eat lots of junk food loaded with sugar and caffeine, and then see how you feel. You're not going to feel good at all. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I don't eat before preaching is I feel so much better. And trust me, I know it's hard right now. I've been addicted to everything from chocolate to alcohol to fast food. And once you change that desire, because what you feed grows, and what grows becomes the dominating force in your life. So once you feed on God-given food, you actually crave that now. I don't, leaving this recording studio, I'm not going to crave junk food. I'm going to create just my body's yearning for that God-given food, because you can change your palate. It doesn't take that long either. So I'm going to give you a few tips here. Again, this is Pastor Shane Idleman filling in for Pastor Scott on the Pastor Scott Show. I want to encourage you to go pastorscott.com and also on Rumble. Guys, Rumble is key because you can listen to the full 2-hour program on Rumble. Also follow me on YouTube and on Rumble and on Instagram. We'll be posting clips and things like that there as well. Shane Idleman with Westside Christian Fellowship, filling in for Pastor Scott. And we are talking about health and fitness from a biblical perspective. So if I'm in this fitness arena as well when I pastor, because I've got friends in the fitness arena, but Gary Brecka, maybe some of you follow, Ben Greenfield, and we chat sometimes. And of course I follow like Gabriel Alliance, Peter Attia. I love the work of Walter Longo right down here, about 20 minutes away at the USC. He's a head of longevity at USC, Paul Saladino, and I try to get all this information. Alan Goldhammer with fasting and True North, and also the Buchenheimer fasting out of Germany, and I try to get all this information and then break it down for Christians to help them. And so, because we can get so, inundated with the different, vegan, plant-based, whole plant-based, raw, fruitarian, carnivore, and I'm gonna hopefully break that down for you, but I don't have a lot of time. So again, go to my books, free downloads at Westside Christian Fellowship, of course on Amazon, but that's a way to get to them right now. So here's a few keys I want to help you with. God-given food. God-given food. That will end the debate right there. Well, what about carnivore? What about whole plant-based? Both of them. Anytime you go to one of the other extremes, for example, carnivore, why do so many people get great benefits? Jordan Peterson, others, because you're putting your body in a ketogenic state. And that's what causes type 2 diabetes, and a lot of insulin-resistant issues are going on. So yeah, that can help for sure. And some people have great results on that. God-given food, right? He allows meat. I'm going to get that in just a minute. What my preferences, but then also whole plant-based food. You're getting tons of phytochemicals, tons of fiber, tons of pectin and nutrients and enzymes and things that are so important. So there are concerns with whole plant-based only with different nutrient deficiencies. I don't really have too much of an issue with that, but I see why people do. And then on the carnivore side, I would not make that a lifestyle, right? Again, look at creation. This will help you. How did God create you? Well, we were designed to eat carbohydrates, the right kind, right? Bananas, potatoes, and things like that. But you have to be, this is the next point. So get God-given food in your pantry, in your refrigerator. And that will be a major, major good change. And the next thing is moderation. Moderation. The Bible talks about many times discipline, self-control. If you see a little bit of honey, have some, but only as much as you need. So once you incorporate moderation, fasting windows, you don't need to be snacking all the time like, I've been guilty of. And then you've got to get movement. You've got to get moving a lot more. Now I park far away and I try to walk a lot more and get your steps in. We were designed, again, look at creation, guys. It's really not that difficult. Moderation, movement, God-given food, and we're designed to move a lot more. Also, Jesus said, when you fast, not if you fast. Fasting is an incredible spiritual discipline that has enormous physical benefits as well. I'm hoping I can get into that in just a minute. Also, you've got to figure out a way to get good sleep. Good sleep, rest, recovery. They're finding more and more that plays a huge role in serotonin. What about testosterone? Why are so many people on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, and usually Cypionate from their doctor, 100 milligrams a week? Why? When they can make their own changes, natural changes that will build up testosterone. I'm not necessarily against hormone replacement therapy. Actually, a good friend of mine, a doctor, is coming on in the next hour to talk about that. But that should be our last resort, not our first. There's a lot of things we can do, and sleep is the big one. The reason most people aren't getting sleep, this is going to be convicting. You guys, don't pull over. Don't get upset. I got to speak the truth. Just breathe a little bit. But the thing that's disrupting our sleep just as much as stress and watching TV or media right before we go to bed is something called caffeine. Caffeine blocks adenosine, and adenosine is what makes us sleepy. And I hear people say, oh, I drink it and I fall right asleep. No, that you pass out. You're not getting deep REM, restful sleep. That's what you need. So if anything, I would try to narrow that down. It's gonna be rough. Withdrawals are hell. But it's a central nervous stimulant. It's a drug. So try to, at least, if you're going to have it in the morning, switch to green tea. Green tea has L-theanine, so it's a much better choice. But with all things, spiritual health is the most important. Spiritual health. So I don't want to focus just on the physical. Spiritual health, forgiveness. Do you have a right relationship with the Lord? Have you repented? That has to be the foundation of what you're building. And you have to choose your heart, basically. When I was overweight, 270 pounds, maybe on my YouTube or wherever, I'll share some pictures. And it was hard. But so is fitness. Having a healthy marriage is hard, but so is a difficult marriage. That's hard as well. Having poor health is really hard. And so fighting for good health is hard. I mean, you've got to choose your heart. Either way is hard. And discipline is so important. It's a biblical principle. I experienced the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. Now, I'm going to tell you something that will be very helpful today. When I fast, I do fast. I've done water fast on Amazon Prime. If you put Shane Idleman and 40-Day Fast, we did a documentary, Amazon Prime picked up. I have never fasted or completed a weight loss program. I don't really call it a weight loss program or diet because it has to be a lifestyle. And that's why many people fall, is because it's not a lifestyle. I've never done it perfectly. I'm just confessing. I'm always, man, I had a handful of peanuts when I was fasting, or I had, or I caved in last night, Mexican food, but you get back on track and you keep moving forward. So when I was at my highest at 270, probably 195 now, at 6'2", I feel incredible. I feel so much better. And you also have to be careful not to overanalyze. There's so much information out there. I mean, you'll in one hour on Instagram or wherever, I'll see these ads for this certain diet, this certain program, juice fasting, intermittent fasting, carnivore is the only way to go. Fruit's trying to kill you. By the way, fruit is not trying to kill you. Fruit is God-given and good, and vegetables, again, in moderation. Overanalyzing, though, and that leads to paralysis. Just step out, do what you know to be right. What I just said, God-given food, moderation, movement, get enough sleep, incorporate fasting, and man, you can see some incredible results. Also, don't listen to the opinions of men. Seek God. Lord, what do you want me to do? So many times I've just couldn't move forward because, especially when fasting, water fasting is the best way. You can't even have gum. You can't even have any broth. And no, you have to have some minimal juice to, and different things. And just seek the Lord, see what he wants you to do, because it's really about direction, not perfection. Direction, not perfection. And then a lot of people, especially when it comes to fasting or some juice or different diets, I'll lose too much muscle. And that kept me, really tied up for a long time too. And actually you won't lose a lot of muscle if you do it right. Buchenheimer in Germany did an incredible extensive survey on 250 calories a day with juice for 10 days, incredible results. And the muscle, it obviously shrinks because of glycogen, but it is rebuilt, and sometimes even more so. And yes, your metabolism slows down, but if you do it right and you refeed correctly and you change your lifestyle, the metabolism is back up, and actually it's even faster than where it was within a week or two. So these things that we've been led to believe, I'm feeling lousy, right? You're detoxing, so keep moving forward. And many people drift away from the why. Like, why are they doing it? You have to focus on the why. Don't you want to see your grandkids, and don't you want to see your kids grow up and get married? Don't you want to have more energy and not always be just lazy and can't sleep and sleep apnea and different things? And also set realistic goals. Realistic goals. That is so important. So perseverance, even when we don't feel like it. Perseverance, even when we don't feel like it. That is the key. So I'm going to go quickly here. Again, you can get my books at ShaneIdelman.com, but also Amazon, and they will answer all these questions. Pastor Shane Idleman filling in for the Pastor Scott Show here on the radio network, and follow us on Rumble, Pastor Scott Show on Rumble. So again, I'm going to go quick. I might have to pick up at the next segment. So what does the Bible say about food, right? Because everybody's divided on this. And most of these guys, they talk from an evolutionary perspective. So evolution is not true. So you have to look at where God begins. He said, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree that has fruit yielding seed, and it shall be food for you and to every beast. So we were designed to be we're designed to eat life-giving plant food from the phytochemicals and the sun and so many different nutrients there. However, after the flood, God said, now I give you permission to eat the meat. And people are divided. Is that because the flood destroyed our environment? So many different things. But I just look at the Bible. In Daniel 10, it appears that when he fasted for 21 days, the outcome was incredible, and God blessed him just consuming vegetables. Meat aligns more with our animalistic nature. Cravings for meat have been the downfall of many people. Just read the Bible. They lusted for quail, and people would often God would rebuke them because of gluttony. Now, you meat eaters, you carnivore guys, don't worry. I'm not against you. I don't take a dogmatic approach. I allow people the freedom to see what that works best for them. But also, I find it ironic that when God gave food from heaven, it was manna. And it was mainly, I think it's bdellium from a tree. And it kind of tasted like honey. So the perfect food that God chose appeared to be plant food. So if you're in Acts 10, though, we find that Peter had a vision about God instructing him to kill and eat meat. Romans 14, Paul talks about not judging. In 1 Timothy, they talk about, the last day, there's deceiving spirits will command people to abstain from certain foods. So I say, you know what? Just like, alcohol is allowed in moderation. I wouldn't advise it. It could be that meat and dairy is allowed, but, I don't know if it's the best choice unless you can get clean. Of course, organic, grass-fed, grass-finished, all those things that are hard for most of us. But I wouldn't get too focused on that. Seek the Lord, have a balanced approach, God-given food. If it were me, I'd have a little bit of meat, obviously with lots of vegetables, and it's just, it's just the way to go. So what happens, I'm going to actually come back to this in a different segment here, but this will help you. Always look at design, from exercise to eating to all these questions, red light therapy, cold water plunge. Don't get caught up in all those different things. Just do the basics. Look at how God designed you. And our health will eventually fail. we need to remember that. We're not going to live forever. I know there's guys out there trying to reverse their age and never die. It's not going to happen. And man-made food gives death. God-given food gives life. So the question I want to leave you with, do we fuel disease and strengthen its grip by making poor choices, or do we fight it by making wise choices? Again, Pastor Shane Idleman filling in for Pastor Scott on the Pastor Scott Show. Follow us on Rumble and all other social media platforms, and we'll continue this discussion in just a minute.
Hey, welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show. Follow us on Instagram at Pastor Scott Show, at Pastor Scott Show. I'm off today, so please welcome Pastor Shane Idleman, sitting in for me, Pastor Shane Idleman.
All right, Pastor Scott, thanks for the introduction. This is Pastor Shane Idleman filling in for Pastor Scott on the Pastor Scott Show. I want to encourage you to go to Rumble and follow the Pastor Scott Show, because you're going to be able to listen to these full episodes, 2 hours of episodes, Monday, Tuesday, today on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. And we are talking about a very important topic. If you don't think it's important right now, trust me, you will as you get older, or you will if you have a major life change or challenge. Also, when New Year's resolutions get here, this is the number one resolution, not even a close second, and that is health and fitness, weight loss. Who are we to trust? How do we navigate through these waters? And I just spent the last 20 minutes or so talking about that, so I'm not going to go back into that. But I've got a friend of mine on the line here in a minute, Dr. Paul Brillhart, and we are going to talk about hormone replacement therapy. That is huge right now. And I just talked about this in the first segment where, we believe, that medication can be a helpful thing, but it needs to be the last resort in many cases, not the first. You can increase testosterone with exercise, eating better, sleep, losing weight, give up alcohol. There's a lot of natural ways as well. So Dr. Paul has 40 years of experience in healthcare, leadership, and management, and he practices as an integrative and functional medicine doctor in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That is basically looking at what is causing the problem. Instead of putting a Band-Aid on it, you're actually going and actually fixing what is causing the issue. And I'm going to be honest here. One of the best books I've ever read on fasting. So I know many of you are looking to fast, or you're going to want to fast in about a month. So write this down. It's called The Lost Art of Fasting in a Gluttonous World. The Lost Art of Fasting in a Gluttonous World. And you can find that at Dr. Paul Brillhart, drpaulbrillhart.com. So with that said, let me see if I can get him on the line here. Dr. Paul, are you on?
I'm on, Shane.
All right. Great to hear from you, my friend. I know you're a few states over. But what we wanted to discuss today was, the recent news coverage. I think that was pretty big, and it kind of vindicated what you've been saying for a long time with the FDA's decision to remove the black box warning that linked hormone replacement therapy. I'm assuming mainly estrogen, probably, I don't know, but to serious risk, including breast cancer in women. And they changed it because it's a reevaluation of the past study. So in a nutshell, your thoughts on that, and what, without having tons of time, what would be the key takeaways when it comes to this topic of hormone replacement therapy?
We were fed a lie about it, and it's unfortunate. I do remember when they came out with that in 2002, and I was waiting for the study because this was my area of interest at the time, and still is. So I was one of the first ones to, actually evaluate, look at the numbers, look at the study, and I did not see what they said was revealed in the study, and I was a little perplexed. I didn't understand. So here we go. Last week, Marty Makary last week announced that the FDA was planning on removing the warning on that, and that's going to be probably in 6 months if they do it. But it's been 23 years.
Wow.
And the data is now just being revealed or uncovered to have been misrepresented to doctors and to the public, and not just to the U.S., but the entire world took off with this.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, now on the flip side, though, we don't want to encourage people, just go get on HRT, because there are
No.
side effects if you don't. And
No,
this is your
we're
expertise. Yeah.
We're just going to talk about why this was repealed, or
Yes.
at least they're talking about, okay, what does this mean? So we learned that the risk for breast cancer was never there, and that the report and the conclusion was, I kind of think, intentionally and prematurely released to quash the HRT push that was out there at the time. Now, I'll come back to that comment because that's inflammatory, but it wasn't scientifically or clinically justified. And we now learn there wasn't any statistical difference in the results to show any risk for breast cancer. Now, that was in the spring of 2002, and the results were released. They were reported, but they had not been published yet. That came out months later. So immediately, however, and this went around the world, it was the withdrawal of HRT as far as recommendations, stating that estrogen caused increased risk of breast cancer, and there was also increased risk of cardiovascular disease, strokes, heart attacks. So there were 27,000 some odd women in these two groups. One had an intact uterus and the other without. They were post-hysterectomy. So the apparent risk at the time was only seen in the group with this synthetic progestin, which was Provera, which was added to the conjugated equine estrogens. So it was not seen right then in the estrogen-only group. Now, the women that had a hysterectomy, they only got estrogen because the only reason doctors were giving progestins was to protect the uterus. Okay, so the estrogen-only group did not have any significant risk. In fact, the study ended up showing that they had a 20% lower risk of breast cancer than the placebo group.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. What would your takeaways be on that, though? For what can people glean from it?
Well, they kept that arm of the study going, and 20 years later,
wow.
they found a 40% reduction in breast cancer compared to the placebo. Whoa! So that's kind of crazy. So the FDA had the data and they looked at it, but anyway, now it's coming out about the people that were behind the closed doors and making this decision, and there was a lot of consternation. There was a lot of disagreement. Because they didn't want to release this conclusion, as there was no clinical significance from the placebo group. So some felt this is unethical. We can't release this because once you release the horses, you'll never get them back.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That is what has happened for the last 23 years. So it was very clear at that point that maybe the increased risk was in the progestin added group. So the Endocrine Society, and I was also part of the Endocrine Society, and this is a group of endocrinologists and endocrine interested doctors and scientists internationally. So they started to investigate. They looked at around 515 studies, and this came out 7 years later, and they had a white paper. And they looked at all the other population studies, and they found that every time you use a synthetic progestin with estrogen, looks like you have a slight risk, but they didn't see that association when they went into looking at progesterone, which is different. And the progestins do not regulate and affect the estrogen receptors in the same manner that the human progesterone does.
Right.
So anyway, we're for the most part not using synthetic progestins. I don't, but we're primarily using micronized progesterone, either orally or topically. And actually, preceding the release of that, I'd been using that micronized progesterone for some years.
So how would, for our listeners, how would they know, what's your advice when somebody should consider hormone replacement therapy, or should they consider changing their diet first and exercise and losing weight?
Well, this is it depends on the age.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And there's you don't want to delay too long. So this is some of the other things that came out of these studies when we looked at it. If you start at menopause or perimenopause and you're supporting these hormones, things go along fine. But then if you wait 10 years, or say over 10 years, it's not recommended to start. Why? We think it's because of the effects of estrogen on the endothelial walls, and they become more stiff, and other changes take place, and it increases risk. It doesn't take it away. But the interesting thing is on this was that the cardiovascular disease wasn't seen in the estrogen and progesterone group. It was in the estrogen also. So they looked at that closely, and then they found out that their methodology was wrong, and they had to recalculate everything.
Wow.
And it came to the equivalent between the HRT and the placebo group. So everyone was, not aware of this. Well,
Let's hold this thought till the next segment. I got to wind it down here.
Okay.
And we're going to move on to the next segment in just a minute. But again, Dr. Paul Brillhart is talking here. Pastor Shane Idleman filling in for Pastor Scott on the Pastor Scott Show. We've been talking about health and fitness from a biblical perspective, which is so important because the Bible does have a lot to say about it. And with hormone replacement therapy, we're going to pick it up when we come back, but we're also going to talk about mental health briefly to see if we can give you some tips on that. I would say this about HRT is, talk to a physician, take it to the Lord in prayer. Are there any natural changes you can make first? We don't necessarily want to run to the medication as the first resort. We want to see if we can make some lifestyle changes as the first resort. So I want to repeat this though, Dr. Paul Brillhart and his book, The Lost Art of Fasting in a Gluttonous World, and the benefits of fasting, and really what has happened over the years. How do we get to the spot in our nation where, we've become so obese, so sick, and we need to make some radical changes. So in his book, The Lost Art of Fasting in a Gluttonous World, he not only breaks down the history of the food industry, but also what type of fasts are good. Not everybody can do water-only fasting, so there are some other alternatives that work really well, and we're going to share a little bit more of that with you towards the end of the program. So again, Pastor Shane Idleman with Westside Christian Fellowship filling in for Pastor Scott on the Pastor Scott Show. If you like what you're hearing, follow us at Rumble. And Pastor Scott Show at Rumble, Shane Idleman at Rumble, and we would love to hear your feedback.
Afternoon, everybody. It's the Pastor Scott Show. Go to pastorscottshow.com, pastorscottshow.com to connect with us online. Hey, I am out today, but sitting in the Pastor Scott Show chair, filling in for me, is Pastor Shane Idleman.
Pastor Shane Idleman here on the Pastor Scott Show. Filling in for him while he enjoys a nice time off. Again, follow us on Rumble to hear this episode in its entirety. I've got a friend of mine on, and just a brilliant physician in the area of HRT, actually hormone replacement therapy. And his name is Dr. Paul Brillhart, and I encourage you to pick up his book, The Lost Art of Fasting in a Gluttonous World, at Dr. Paul Brillhart, BRILLHRT.com. And we just left off talking about hormone replacement therapy, primarily for women, and the study that the FDA is removing their black box warning. And then we're going to go right into mental health as well. I'm sure there's some type of connection. So, Dr. Paul, we left off about the findings of what they actually found from this study.
Right. And I mentioned about the breast cancer risk, and
yes,
that didn't appear there. And then the cardiovascular risk, that also didn't seem to be there. In fact, it looked like, there is protection. And that was one of the things they went into that study to try and show. Well, it didn't show that. It showed, according to them, the opposite. But it wasn't true. So in 2015, there was a Cochrane meta-analysis, 19 randomized clinical trials. They found that HRT reduced cardiovascular events by 48%. This was 2015. So that would have translated into many lives saved during the last 23 years of women that are on it. And that's actually a lower risk reduction than, say, using cholesterol-lowering drugs. Whoa. But
wow.
last comment on this was, Rachel Rubin. She's a doctor on the FDA panel, and I wrote down a quote from her. The box label that was blanketly placed on all products in 2003 has no data to support its existence. 22 years later and consensus guidelines later, this deserves another look. So that's where we're at.
Wow.
Every woman is going to enter this, so she needs to talk with a doctor that is knowledgeable on the topic. They are not all. They don't have all the interest. So it's important to find one. There are more gynecologists than primary care doctors that are prescribing hormones, but not all gynecologists have interest or the same experience in this.
Right.
Integrative and functional medicine doctors, yes, I'm a little biased, but yes, generally they've been the most versed in this.
Because they look at the whole package. That's really the key. And just if the listener's unaware, hormone replacement therapy is as you get older, your endocrine system takes a toll, and testosterone, estrogen, growth hormone, these important hormones, and women, primarily estrogen, is decreasing. So there's synthetic estrogen that women would take. And then TRT, which is testosterone replacement therapy, is for men. But I see a lot of guys getting on it in their 30s. I went to the doctor and I have a low testosterone. No, you need to lose 40 pounds and stop drinking alcohol. But they want to get big and be a bodybuilder. And so I would really just be careful in that area too. But we need to move on to mental health. Yeah. And again, talking to Dr. Paul Brillhart on this area of mental health. Now, here's the thing with mental health, and I'll let you have it because you're really good in this area too. Mental health is our emotional, our psychological, it's our social health. It affects, how we think, how we feel, how we act. And it's really defined by the ability to cope with the stresses of life. And me and you've talked about this before, that things can really throw off. It's really about hormonal balance, right? Mental health can be tied to the HRT as well, with stress, nutrient deficiencies, diet, lifestyle, and then I look at it from a Christian perspective, taking thoughts captive, demonic opposition, all those different things. And maybe you can touch on when to medicate, when to wait. So any thoughts on mental health overall? I know we need about 3 hours, but we'll try.
I need about 3 hours, but I'll give you my approach, and I just kind of little bullet points. I start off with nutrition, and that is the foundation of everything. I put people on a whole food diet. It's an anti-inflammatory diet. Why? Inflammation in the brain is linked to anxiety and depression and all the other mental health disorders. And that's a real eye-opener when you look into the research on that. So I take people off their processed food diet. I tell them you're not eating out anymore.
Yep.
Okay, because even, at the best restaurants, you're not necessarily getting the best food and nutrients in you. So I try to optimize that. If we want to heal the brain, we're going to have to heal the intake. So the second thing is I optimize the gut health. And again, that has to do with the nutrition coming in, and especially in the form of fiber. And the fiber feeds the microbiome, and the microbiome affects the brain. We know about the gut-brain connection we have for the last 15, 20 years, and how if you have an optimal microbiome, which they also produce certain amounts of neurotransmitters, we have better mental health. There's decreased depression, anxiety when we change, for instance, adolescents' diets.
Yes.
And that's been studied. All of these things have. Then I use nutrients in combination with that, omega-3s, and I try to optimize that. And I use high quality fish oil, not anything that's rancid out there, but
key
quality. And then I at the same time I'm raising the threes, and this goes back 25 years. High intake of omega-3s, lower incidence of depression, anxiety, and the opposite is true. Low intake. Okay, and that reflects 90% of the U.S. population is that low intake. And so the omega-6s, which people refer to them as seed oils, but it's basically the linoleic acid, but it causes inflammation, and it does lead to just the opposite of what you're looking for.
Yeah.
The vitamin D is another thing, and I recommend people get their D levels checked, and I'm trying to optimize between 50 and 100. They give a range of 30 to 100, but you don't get all of the functions of D optimized until you pass 50. Optimal is 60 to 80. But anyway, you never do this without checking levels. And then we have found that the D, it stabilizes neurotransmitters. People know about seasonal affective disorder, winter depression, winter blues, and that in part is due to a low D. And so you can have this any time of the year, because people, even here in where I live in Oklahoma, they have single-digit D levels in the middle of summer.
Whoa.
Should be high. Okay, so I start off with that. Then I put in a complement of, quality B complex, and usually preferable the methylated forms of the B vitamins. And I don't have time to explain all that right now.
Right.
But the next would be other nutrients that I use. And these have been studied, and many of them head-to-head, and we have lots of clinical trials looking at this, but it's GABA. And
GABA aminobutyric acid?
Exactly, and that is a neurotransmitter, and it's a
That's
calming.
right.
And it's the same. Those receptors are calmed with Xanax or Valium or those types of benzodiazepines. So years ago, I remember them saying, you can't get GABA into the brain. It doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. Well, it turns out that they had old methodology and assays that weren't very sensitive. And now we know it can cross the blood-brain barrier, however, not very robustly and not in high amounts, but it does cross and it does affect. However, there's other ways that the GABA can stimulate the brain. Remember, I mentioned the gut-brain connection. Well, there are GABA receptors, the enteric nervous system, so that's the gut-brain relationship. And so the GABA affects you this way in the brain. And then I think also that the GABA hits the vagus nerve, which also is linked. And I can come back to that. Let's see, the next thing I use, this is more conventional. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. I tried to get a therapist, and again, I'm picky on who I use, and especially if it's a Christian out there, they would be better suited to have a Christian psychotherapist that actually understands that other the added dimension.
Right, we're the biblical based, yeah.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is basically giving you tools that work very well in the long run for keeping people stable.
Yes.
So moving on, I mean, let's see.
Well, you know what? I've been meaning to ask you this question. I've heard these numbers, and I just can't really believe it, but it could be true. Is the majority of the amount of serotonin made in our gut?
Yeah.
And serotonin is what makes you feel better.
Yes and no.
Okay.
There's a lot of theories about that and what is behind depression. We do want healthy serotonin levels. There's problems if you get too much serotonin, if you get too little serotonin. And other things that I didn't mention, for instance, like L-theanine. I'll use that in combination.
L-theanine, yeah, green tea.
And L-theanine blocks glutamate receptors, and that's excitatory in the brain. You don't want that, like monosodium glutamate.
Right.
Okay, bad for the brain. But L-theanine blocks that, calms the brain down. It doesn't make you sleepy, but it also supports the GABAergic system and neurotransmitters. So it's a really good thing. I don't have time to go into all that. I use magnesium glycinate or threonate, and threonate's the only kind that can go across into the brain. But I caution that because people just can't use whatever they want and think, well, it's safe. Well, if you had renal failure, you may run into a problem.
Because there's always even with healthy supplements, you've got to look. There's always a give and a take. Yeah.
So I'm not telling people, go out and buy all these things. No, you need some. Yeah. You need to know someone that knows how to navigate through this. So I use a little bit of taurine as well with that. But again, moving on, I think we may have talked about this before. Red light therapy.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that has been studied with depression, anxiety, traumatic brain injury, and using the full spectrum of the red and doing, 10, 20 minutes, 2 to 4 times a week. You will see results in 6 to 12 weeks. And it actually works in the brain. It increases cerebral flow. It decreases neuroinflammation.
So to sum it up, I've got 1 minute, less than a minute. It's really God-given food in moderation, exercise, diet, lifestyle, and of course, seeking godly counsel. And we don't realize how our mental health is really affected by our lifestyle and our diet. So Dr. Paul Brillhart, I know we're short on time. I want to thank you so much. And I want to encourage people. I know they got lots of questions, but they can go to drpaulbrillhart.com and order The Lost Art of Fasting in a Gluttonous World, because not only do you talk about fasting, you also talk about everything you just talked about too, in regard to diet, nutrition, and different ways of getting our health back on track. So again, Pastor Shane Idleman filling in for Pastor Scott. This is Pastor Shane Idleman with Westside Christian Fellowship, and follow Pastor Scott on Rumble and all the other places that you follow his ministry. Thank you again.